Dragonflight is overall pretty good, especially compared to the fever dream that was Shadowlands. But it could be better. I'd like to take a look at certain areas of the game and talk about possible improvements that could be made, starting off with Mythic Plus. I'll go over what I believe to be the biggest issues playing its part right now, starting with a pretty big one. Let's dive right in. So the problem you're faced with when depleting a key is multifaceted. In a nutshell, you are punished way too hard in different ways for not timing a key. Let's break that down. First of all, the time you commit to a failed run. Let's take Halls of Valor as an example. You deplete the key with an overtime of a mere 20 seconds. That really sucks, because you just spent close to 40 minutes in that dungeon and have most likely nothing to really show for it. Now, this isn't something that can be changed, since all the content you do takes time regardless of whether or not you succeed or fail. That's just kinda like life, you know? I'll reference this point again a bit later on though. For now, let's move on to another way you get punished. Your keystone level is lowered by 1. Oof. The big one. After spending 38 plus minutes in your halls run, you're sent to another dungeon on a lower level. To make a somewhat similar comparison, this would be like wiping on a raid boss in Mythic difficulty and then being forced to do a fight on Heroic again before you can attempt a Mythic boss fight once more. If you for any reason, be it score or loot, really need a Halls key, this means you need to hope someone you're pre-made has another Halls key or resort to pugs, which we never want to do. It doesn't make sense, and the punishment is just way too hard. Additionally, this also just adds to our time spent counter mentioned earlier, since we now have to do another dungeon to bring our key back to its original level, easily adding another 25 to 30ish minutes at least. And lastly, lower item level loot. When depleting a key, one piece of loot will be of the item level of a lower level key. Admittedly, this is more of an issue at the start of a major patch. Once everyone is fully geared, this becomes rather irrelevant, but it still doesn't make sense. The group is already punished by the amount of time spent on a failed run, the key holder is punished by receiving a lower level key, and now everyone's also punished by having an item that's of less value. Conclusion. Remember the first point I made about time commitment on a failed run? That alone is enough punishment for a depleted key. Adding a lower key level and worse quality loot on top of it is just too harsh and not fun. To give a personal anecdote, 3 weeks or so ago, a pre-made I pushed keys with had 221 academies in bags. We attempted the first one and went 2 minutes overtime. We looked at what went wrong in this attempt and felt like we could do better by changing up some things. On our second attempt with the second key, we timed it with 1 minute left to spare. This felt good. Now imagine if we didn't have that second key on the same key level. We would have felt like we could have timed it, but we were robbed of both our time and a second chance. As a final comment on this, if Blizzard is really unwilling to change this, I would advocate for a practice mode of sorts. Basically the equivalent of a tournament realm where you can load up your key and practice, try things out, etc. until you feel ready for the actual run. Weekly caps and time gating. An ever hot topic within the World of Warcraft community. Here I want to specifically talk about Valor and the Revival Catalyst. First of all, I am in favor of a Valorant Catalyst charge cap being in the game at the start of every season. It just makes sense. No caps on these would mean everyone could just farm Valor in low keys and upgrade the gear they farm along the way to Mythic raid item level in the first week. However, the removal of these caps, or the introduction of the Catalyst to begin with, happens way too late in the season. It's like Blizzard is scared their players will be fully geared 1 to 1.5 months into the season and will all stop playing, while it's quite literally the opposite. People are excited to have reached a solid power level to do the content they want, and might give alts a try on top of it. I actively, personally raided and maxed my vault with the PvE activities every week on my main, and it took me until the end of January before I finished my 4-set. This isn't fun. This doesn't feel like a fun and interactive gearing process. It's just frustrating. Uncap Valor and give us access to the Catalyst 4 to 5 weeks after the season launch, max. The race to World First will be over by then, so that won't be compromised, and people will have enough time adjusting to the new things in the season. They'll have had some time to collect the gear they'd want to use Valor on or turn into tier, etc. Having us wait more than 2 months is unreasonable. I'll have to clarify the term distribution here. What I'm talking about isn't related to group loot or person loot or master loot and whatnot, but how many pieces drop in each dungeon and what kind of stat distributions you come across. I am a leather wearer, and Shadow Moon Burial Grounds has a whopping 2 pieces of loot for me. At the same time, Halls of Valor's loot table for leather wearers consists of about 15 items. This isn't the biggest point of frustration, especially compared to what's already talked about and what is still to come, but it's so random and silly that I just want to point it out. To give an anecdote, I play Guardian and Feral Druid, so I spent the first 5 days or so of the season farming Court of Stars for the Melandris Ring and Whetstone Trinket. Luckily, I could take advantage of the weird way loot is split between the dungeons, because Court of Stars drops a wardrobe worth of leather gear plus an agility staff for me. This, however, still feels kinda wrong and weird, and an easy way to give dungeons more character and uniqueness is to have solidly established loot tables with an equal spread. Additionally, everyone should take a look at the amount of pieces of the same slot that give the same stats. I'll give you 4 for free. The rest you can try and find yourself if you'd like. Temple of the Jade Serpent drops 4 cloaks, 2 with crit haste, 2 with crit mastery. All this does is lead to a bloated loot table and a reduced chance of getting specific items you're looking for. The dungeons in Dragonflight Season 1 are meh, in my opinion. The reason I'm not quite excited about them is mostly down to dungeon design. Let's break that down. The difference in difficulty between the dungeons feels incredibly weird. By now, we all know that SBG and Court of Stars are considered the +2 keys, and places like Azure Vault and Ruby Life Pools feel way more brutal and scary. In all of the Dragonflight dungeons specifically, every mob has at least 1 to 2 mechanics, which leads to a very steep learning curve initially, and tons of pug unfriendliness. Additionally, it's just not fun to constantly be on your feet every trash pull you do, making sure all the kicks and stuns and knockbacks happen at the right time. I'd much rather deal with fewer but more difficult mechanics each pack than the storm of spellcasts, frontals, cleaves, slams, dots, and dispels we're dealing with right now. This is less of a problem in premates, but still too much of a problem for it not to be mentioned. I'll clarify this by giving some examples. Dealing with the imps in Court of Stars by having a CC chain in place to stop their casts from going off is fine. Dealing with the Piercing Shards cast in Azure Vaults by properly CC chaining them is also fine. What isn't fine is depleting a Ruby Life Pools key because you run out of kicks and stops, leading to a Cinderbolt going off on your healer, and at the same time an Inferno cast finishes, leading to your healer getting 100 to 0'd in 0.1 seconds, which then leads to your entire group wiping. Oh, we end with a bang! This list would not be complete without the mention of affixes. Affixes are a great way to make you think differently about how to approach the dungeons on a weekly basis. An added element that is independent from the mobs or bosses provides more depth to the gameplay loop. However, with the exception of Storming, Spiteful, and the seasonal affix, which will always be new, all the affixes in the rotation are old. In fact, the entire philosophy regarding affixes is outdated. M+ is an infinitely scaling dungeon grind. The higher your keystone level, the harder the key. At some point, the player base reaches a natural limit, where even the best of the best key pushes cannot push forward any further. Having affixes that add extra difficulty on top of this infinitely scaling system isn't necessarily a bad thing. Having affixes that are unfun definitely is. They've experimented with a kiss curse system for the seasonal affixes for a while now, but I'd like to see this happen to the normal affixes we face as well. What about changing explosives so that when you kill an orb, it deals a small amount of damage to the mobs you're actively fighting? Or what about making it so killing an orb gives the entire group a main stat buff, which stacks with the amount of orbs are killed? What about changing Sanguine so that the healing and damage it can do is limited to something like 5 ticks of the hot or dot, and then it disappears? These are just a couple of examples that I came up with on the spot. There's tons of room for brainstorming here. There is, however, another issue that needs mentioning. Some affixes simply need to go. Things like quaking and storming are incredibly frustrating to play around and often overlap with mob or boss abilities in such a way that you feel cheated.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
We got chosen.
Yeah.
This simply isn't fun. Playing around this isn't fun and is sometimes just impossible. Changing affixes in a way that positively influences the dungeon run allows us to completely avoid this problem. And remember, there will always be a cap regarding how high key levels will go. That's the nature of an infinitely scaling system. The only thing that would change is that people will have more fun. And there we are. This is a list of things that currently bother me the most with M+. Now, a disclaimer, I love WoW and I love M+. I'd just like to see it be an even better version of itself than it currently is. What about you? Is there anything you think I missed? Is there anything you disagree with? Do let me know in the comments if you'd like, as long as we keep it civil, of course. Is there anything you'd like to pick my brain about? Let me know down below. And with that, I am out.